All right. We are in Job 26. We have a couple visitors, so we've been doing a study of the book of Job. Not visitors, but, we haven't been here for a class for a while. For those that have the worksheets, this is in Lesson 5. We're getting ready for question number 4, but we have not yet read chapter 26 yet. We're in the middle of the final round of speeches, the debates between Job and his friends. Remember, they started this all because Job expressed just how miserable he was being alive, and they thought, well, you must have had it coming because God only does bad stuff to bad people and good stuff to good people. And so that's sort of been the debate back and forth. Here in this last round of speeches, we've noticed they're all getting shorter. They're all getting, less informative, more angry and personal is kind of the trend of these speeches. And his friends don't really have a lot to say anymore. Job kind of gets the final word in a lot of this. But we're picking up here with what Job has been responding to his friend Eliphaz, who basically claimed, you must have done everything wrong under the book, right? Under the sun. Because otherwise God would never have let you have so many bad things all at once. So starting in verse 1, Job responded, "What a help you are to the weak, how you have saved the arm without strength. What counsel you've given to one without wisdom. What helpful insight you've abundantly provided. To whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit was expressed through you? The departed spirits tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Naked is Sheol before him. Abaddon has no covering. He stretches out of the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. He wraps up the waters in his clouds, and the cloud does not burst under them. He obscures the face of the full moon, and he spreads his cloud over it. He's inscribed a circle on the surface of the waters at the boundary of light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are amazed at his rebuke. He quieted the sea with his power, and with his understanding he shattered Rahab. By his breath the heavens are cleared, and his hand has pierced the fleeing serpent. Behold, these are the fringes of his ways, and now faint a word we hear of him, but his mighty thunder, who can understand? Okay, so just starting, I wanted to make sure to read that. I don't think I put the right reference on that one, but I think I have been reading the wrong chapter. I think it's supposed to be 24, right? Well, guys, we are going to get to 26, I promise. I made the mistake on here on the workbook, and I got to take credit for that since I made the workbook. It didn't sound right, but we will get to that later in the lesson. Hopefully you enjoyed Job 26. Job 24, let's go ahead and read that. Why are the times not stored up by the Almighty? Why do those who know him not see his days? Some remove the landmarks, they seize and devour the flocks, they drive away the donkeys of the orphans, they take the widow's ox for a pledge, they push the needy aside for the road. The poor of the land are made to hide themselves altogether. Behold, as wild donkeys in the wilderness. They go forth seeking food in their activity, as bread for their children in the desert. They harvest their fodder in the field, and glean the vineyard of the wicked. They spend the night naked without clothing, have no covering against the cold. They are wet with the mountain's rains, and hug the rock for want of a shelter. Others snatch the orphan from the breast. Against the poor they take a pledge. They cause the poor to go about naked without clothing. They take away the sheaves from the hungry. Within the walls they produce oil, and they tread wine presses, but thirst. From the city men groan, and the souls of the wounded cry out, yet God does not pay attention to folly. So, looking at this, what are some of the things, it's a bit shocking. What does Job say that God either ignores or allows to happen or simply just doesn't deal with? What are some of the things here that you notice in the text? Eric?
Evil people. He allows them to exist.
Yeah. So he's actually arguing the exact opposite of what the friends were, right? Because the friends were saying, just look at the world around you. When have you ever seen a good person or an innocent person suffering? But if you actually look around you, Job's a little bit more right, isn't he? Now, not that God ignores this or that God doesn't see it, but that it happens, right? Think about some of this stuff here. Some of them are a little weird to us culturally, but moving the boundaries, that would be like they all had kind of a communal field, but you knew your land based on where they put these big stones. And so maybe you're like, I want to earn a little more crops this season, so you go out there when no one's looking and move the stone and claim a little bit of their field. Maybe I've heard of people had a neighbor who built their fence a little bit on their property line, things like that, right? I want to get a little more yard here. People stealing. He even talks about there's a child who is nursing and you just take it from its mother and make this child your servant. Or a hungry person has been gathering some sheaves and you take the sheaves away from him. So the work that he's supposed to be doing to earn food for himself, and he doesn't even get to feed himself. But is Job correct, at least in some cases? Yeah. I mean, I would say turn on the news just to prove Job right and then turn it off again so you don't depress yourself, because this world is full of wickedness. People get away with it, right? But I guess that premise, though, is that true? What would you say to someone in Job's situation? Go ahead.
I would have to try to tell them that's not true. You're saying something that is not true even though you feel it.
Yeah.
There's a reason for it. We just don't know what it is.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Go ahead, Robin.
Well, according to Jesus, God knows every sparrow that falls to the ground, and he says that we're much more valuable than sparrows, and so he even knows the number of hairs on our head, which is unfathomable. So
yeah. So we have to remind ourselves that just because life in this moment isn't going in a good way, and maybe currently injustices are being perpetrated, that doesn't mean God doesn't see it or notice it or care. It's our sense of justice is like as soon as we know it's wrong, we want it dealt with. But that's not how the world really works, right? Go ahead, Rick.
I was thinking about how blessed we are to know, as far as God's revelation goes, the whole picture. We see everything now, and we see Jesus as the answer to those things, that God has made a pledge, and Job even talks about that, about, I wish I had a handshake, a pledge from God to know that he hasn't forgotten about me. Jesus is that pledge. Jesus is the handshake from God that says, I'm aware of what's going on. I am going to fix it. And this is a part of that, and we just have to now be patient. These people, they didn't have that picture yet. And just we are so blessed to know the whole story, that, from beginning to end, God has been dealing with our sin from the moment, in fact, from before it even happened. And what a privilege that is, which is why we have to point people to Jesus to say, he is the answer to every heartbreak that you have. God will bring it to an end one day. Pain has an expiration date, but it's not today.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a comment from Joanne up here.
Also, when we're hurting, we want God to fix it really fast, and it says wait on the Lord. And so we have to, like Rick said, we have to be patient and wait for God to do it in his own time.
Yeah. I think a no is almost easier than a wait, isn't it? If God could say no and we knew no was the answer, but when you're holding out hope and eventually it'll be dealt with, but when? How long, O Lord, right? That's a hard thing to do. Eric? That's
how patience is learned. It's yes and no are satisfaction answers.
Yeah.
Patience is wait and find out.
Yeah, and it's essential for the believer. Now imagine we know so much more. We know the words of Jesus that make things clear. We understand the plan of salvation and how God worked all things out, how sin will be dealt with eventually. But, this is a difficult concept. to look at a world that's just not fair, you know. But Ecclesiastes and other places, they also say similar things too, right? Ecclesiastes says there's people who work really hard and save a bunch of money, and then they pass it on to their kids, and the kids squander it, right? That's not fair. Or there's passages that talk about the race is not always to the swift, right? And the battle is not always to the strong. You know, this world isn't always fair. Now, I will say something, though. Even in this world, if someone's getting away with something now, it doesn't mean they're going to get away with it forever. And I think that's something we have to remind ourselves of. And now, I wish I could remember, if you guys are true crime people, you know, serial killers and all that stuff, they just recently did a DNA test on an old case and found out someone who was murdered in the 70s was tied to a serial killer. They were able to find out who did it and give the family some closure. Not that it makes it better, but still, the fact that there are answers given later, and sometimes they can bring a criminal to justice 20 years later. Like, a CEO gets away with something, fraud, for 10 years, and then suddenly gets arrested. You know, there is, even in this world, the idea that justice may not be right now, but it doesn't mean it's never coming. And that doesn't necessarily even mean that it's not even noticed, because we understand that sometimes our government has to build a case, right, before they can convict somebody. And so they're gathering evidence, they're building a case, they're doing whatever they got to do. But God does this on a grand global scale, but in our personal life, we don't necessarily see all those details or fathom what's going on, and we don't see the big picture. And reminding ourselves that there is something eternal, too, can help us sort our way through this. Go ahead, Rick.
I was just sitting there thinking as you were talking, you know, the government is building a case. They're not waiting for this person to turn themselves in or repent, but God is, you know, and how that should, if we adopt the heart of Christ, that should change or at least temper, you know, our anger, our vengeance, to remember that what I'm after is still going to mean the destruction of a soul, and that is not, if I'm a man like God wants me to be, that's not my chief priority. My chief priority is saving that soul. If that soul won't submit, if that soul is going to be corrupt, then so be it. God's justice be done. But my first priority, like His, is the reconciliation, and that is the great difference between man's justice and God's. We don't typically sit back and wait for people to feel sorry and then come and tell us, hey, I did these things. You know, we're waiting because we're building a case or we're getting evidence. God waits because He's wanting a heart to change so He doesn't have to destroy them. It's such a difference.
Yeah. As much as He was waiting for that audience with God, we know God's justice now even more so than Job ever did, right? And God's going to take care of it. Takes that patience. So these sins, obviously, he says, God doesn't see. God doesn't notice. People get away with these all the time. Is it true? You know, that's, in this life, some people may get away with it to the grave, right? But in the long term, no one's going to get away with it, right? God knows, God sees, God hears. God pays attention to the plight of the innocent. He's going to deal with the problem of sin. He already has in the greatest way through Jesus, but we know this world's still ruled over by the prince of the air, right? And the devil has sway over people, and this world is not perfect. It's going to be dealt with. We have to remind ourselves of that and wait on the Lord. By the way, obviously, how serious are those things? If you go back and look at some of those passages, a lot of them were death penalty or else being kicked out of your inheritance. So this is like serious, serious stuff. And I give Job not a free pass, but I give him a bit of a grace here as he's suffering, and this is how he feels. But the truth is, God certainly does not overlook any of these sins. He is going to deal with them in His time. Moving on to question 5, we have the tiniest speech of the book, and it doesn't exactly contribute a whole lot. I don't think we'll spend too much time on Bildad, and I don't think Job did either. But let's go ahead and read that short little chapter. Bildad the Shuhite answered, "Dominion and all belong to Him who establishes peace in His heights. Is there any number to His troops? And upon whom does His light not rise? How then can a man be just with God? Or how can he be clean who is born of a woman? if even the moon has no brightness, the stars are not pure in his sight, how much less man, that maggot, that son of man, that worm. All right. What do you think of what Bildad says? First of all, agree, disagree, good, bad? What do you think? Jerry?
I think disagreeing is the answer. And also, I don't think he said anything new that I noticed anyway.
Yeah. Overall, I think he's not saying anything that hasn't been said, even by Job himself, by the way. I don't know really what is super objectionable about what he says. When compared to God, am I just a worm or a maggot? Kinda, yeah, right? Now, God doesn't see me that way, but if I were just to measure myself, yeah, I'm a nothing. Can a man be just before God? Not without Jesus, So, like, on one hand, I kind of agree. On the other hand, he's saying this pointing at Job. He's saying, Job, right? You are just this maggot of a man. You're a nobody, right? Go ahead.
It seems like as these go on, it's reducing down, like kids or people argue, to the "you're dumb, no, you're dumb."
Yeah.
They're getting shorter and meaner, just calling names.
Yeah. Both saying, you don't add anything to this conversation. Are you the genius who should teach me? That kind of it's the definitely much more petty going on. I think it's interesting. He talks about there's no end to the troops of God. One of my favorite names for God is the God of hosts, the Lord of hosts, right? Lord Sabaoth. That's such a cool concept that he's the Lord of armies. Now, if you're his enemy, God being the Lord of armies is not who you want to face. But if you're on God's side, having the Lord of armies, heavenly angel armies on your side is a great thing. So he's not saying anything that's like outlandishly bad. It's just like, why even talk if it's not going to add something to the conversation? And why point this at Job when Job is not deserving of these comments? Go ahead, Jerry.
I said I disagree because I knew he was pointing it at
Sure.
Job.
Sure. And I wasn't disagreeing with your comment. So, yeah, because Job is not guilty in this situation, right? And that's the biggest flaw in what Bildad says. At least he doesn't get petty and personal in the same way that Eliphaz just did when he accused him of like taking money from widows and orphans and stuff. That was a low blow for Eliphaz, but Zophar won't even speak up. I kind of wonder. We'll talk about maybe why in a little bit, but he's just done talking, I guess. Any other thoughts on that little blurb of a chapter? I didn't move along my PowerPoint. So there you go. That's my answers to my questions. We already read chapter 26, and Job, of course, kind of mocks him, right? Oh, what a help you are. What a great help. You've just given the weary and the weak everything they need to be strong, and you could just read it with that sarcasm, right? And what could Bildad really answer to that, right? Go ahead.
I wonder if Job's response is why God responds to him kind of in the same way in the end. God's throwing it back at him.
Yeah.
This is how you responded, and how you're going to, who are you when I set the earth? Tell me how I did it.
Well, it's funny because God's going to use some of the same exact categories and talk about, where were you when light was created? Like, and could you shake the heavens? And how about these fearsome sea creatures? Could you attack them? So God is going to use his exact points the way that he's kind of stepping up to argue. I think you're right. That's a very good observation. I did want to kind of talk a little bit about a couple of words here because not being an ancient Hebrew culture or even just ancient Near Eastern culture, some of these ideas are a little bit strange. First of all, there are differences of opinions about exactly what they thought about the afterlife, but when you see the word Sheol, that is typically the grave, the realm of the departed spirits, they would say. They wouldn't look at that necessarily as a final resting place, but when people die, they go there. And Sheol is most often talked about in the book of Psalms. You'll see that a lot. But it basically means dead. But there is an idea in the book of Ezekiel where he gets taken on this grand tour of the underworld and gets to see all these fancy rich kings and armies. It's like, oh, well, Pharaoh's down under the underworld too. He died. This king of this place over here, he's under here. He died. And so he gets kind of a tour similar. And by the way, our culture has that too, don't we? With if you ever read Dante stuff back in school or something like that, we have people that did the tours of the underworld and all that stuff. But the other word in here, Abaddon, by the way, does anyone probably has a footnote of what that word means in verse 6? It's kind of the idea of destruction. That might be closer to their idea of like, I'm trying to think, this like the destroying angel is sometimes attached to that word. Could be like fire and brimstone sort of idea. I'm not going to say they understood what the New Testament says about hell, but maybe a little closer to that kind of a picture. Sort of like hellfire sort of a thing. So he's saying basically, God can see into the underworld, no problem. Destruction and all these things, the destroying angels, God knows exactly what's going to happen. In fact, he commands these things that we are powerless against as human beings. And then one final one, when you see Rahab here, I promise you it's not Rahab from the story of Rahab. But they had, in a lot of their culture, ancient ideas about unknown, kinds of things, especially in the sea. The sea was a very unknown place to them. And Rahab is this basically sea serpent, this dragon-like monster that a lot of their myths, their gods were known for killing monsters, right? And even we know, like Roman and Greek things, their gods were known for killing monsters. Basically, our God kills all the monsters, is sort of the idea that it's talking about him here. There's probably some deeper things too, but I just want to at least clear up those kind of terms when you're reading it, because if you didn't know that about Rahab, you're probably like, wait a minute, how does Rahab fit in this story? So, anybody have any thoughts on that or anything else you observed in chapter 26? What is he overall saying about God in chapter 26? He has power, right? So he's technically not disagreeing with Bildad. Bildad's like, God's so much above you, man's just a worm compared to him. He's like, well, of course God is bigger than all of us. He can handle ancient sea serpents. God can handle death itself. It's no big deal to him. God knows where light and darkness are separated. And so almost saying, you're accusing me of being dumb, like I don't realize what you're saying? Like, I agree. God is great and powerful, and that's what I've been saying the whole time. He's more mighty than me. But that doesn't get to the heart of the question, why am I suffering? So sometimes when we argue, we say the same thing, and we would find that we would agree more than we disagree. But it's just kind of interesting here that I don't think he's actually disagreeing with Bildad and just saying it's not all about, like I'm not suffering because I'm guilty here. Any other thoughts on chapter 26? Basically, that's what I said, right? Sarcasm, mocking, accuses him of contributing nothing, which we would agree, I think. All right. Go ahead.
Kind of going back to how God acted. God was sarcastic and said,
Yeah.
You really didn't do anything when I was making the earth. So it's kind of,
Yeah, I hung the stars up there. I set the waters in the heavens. I did all this stuff. Where were you? Right. Okay, let's talk for a minute about Zophar. So clearly there's no part here that says Zophar started talking. It gets right into chapter 27. Then Job continued his discourse. I'm sure you probably thought about it a little bit, but what might be the possibilities for the reason why we skip Zophar, go from Job to more Job. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I mean, the obvious one is he may have gotten disgusted and gone home. Sometimes the fool eventually realizes all I'm doing is talking in circles. I'm wasting my time, and you get so angry that you just, if I stay, I'm going to do something bad. Turn around, and go home. I mean, I think that's one that jumps out as a strong possibility, knowing human nature.
Yeah, good. Other thoughts? So I was kind of digging into this, the theories of what people say out there. Some of these I probably wouldn't have thought of if I didn't read that someone else thought these. But some people thought his speech was lost, that maybe it originally was here, but this is a process of editing over time. I don't think that's likely, just because you see how Bildad's got so much shorter, and Zophar's was already the shortest. I think we would know, it would fit in there somewhere. The language would be another response rather than a continuum of discourse, right? Some people have suggested that chapter 28, which we're going to get to in a little bit, which is very different in tone, might actually be Zophar speaking. I disagree. In fact, 28 is the only part that I wonder if it technically might not have been Job, that I feel like Solomon might have written 28 or somebody later. If Solomon was the one writing down the story that they had for years and years and years, known about Job, of course the Holy Spirit's the author. It could be Job speaking in 28, but it also could be someone else later. It certainly does not sound anything like Zophar. He was not poetic in the least. And this is the one I think agrees with what Rick said. This is my position. He's nothing left to say. He's frustrated. He's out of arguments. What could I say to convince him? I'm too fed up to talk anymore. I'm just kind of over this conversation. And maybe even just sitting there dumbfounded, like he keeps going. But Job has proved himself reasonable to a degree, and I don't think they can answer it. They really can't. They have no explanation. Why would a good man suffer? And if it's not the fact that he was secretly a bad person, then what is the answer? Right? That's the best Eliphaz could come up with. He's like, well, obviously you must have had this double life and you were secretly stealing from widows and orphans and terrible. Otherwise, God wouldn't have done this to you. So that's my opinion about why the speech isn't here. Make sense? Agree, disagree? Rick?
I was just going to suggest, too, that might be one of the reasons why the younger fella, Elihu, comes in. It's almost kind of like a way of if you're thinking about it from a putting it together sort of perspective, yes, I believe Elihu was really there, but as Solomon or whoever is putting this together, well, this is what has happened. Job's friends are falling off. They don't have anything useful to say anymore. You get Zophar, he just goes home. And so Elihu kind of takes his place, but it's filled with this youthful, bombastic. And so it's definitely different than the other three were. So it's almost like God is kind of showing us that these guys, the more they talk, the stupider they look. And then, well, what else would you expect but a youthful person to come in and think, well, I can fix this with many words. And so it's almost a humorous, but I think pointed way of showing it doesn't matter whether you're old and experienced or young and vigorous. When you don't understand God or when you try to speak for him, you're going to look like a fool and you're going to eventually be shut, whether it's by your own choice or by God's.
Yeah. And I think kind of it's on a big point. We need to be careful in speaking for God, don't we? Like, let God speak for himself. And if there's something that you're trying to really reason out to help somebody, say, there's some things that this is hard. Here's my best understanding of the situation. Here's the verses in the Bible that I go to explain this. But I got to admit, there are some things that I have trouble with still. And if you don't think so, either you're not paying attention or you aren't honest. There are some troubling things when we think about how the world works, I'm not saying you can't take it on faith and have confidence, but if you think you have every answer to every hard question, you haven't lived through enough stuff, right? Because there are hard things that happen, like to Job here. Let's read chapter 27. I really like this chapter. And really, the rest of the book, I think, is pretty encouraging. But let's read what's here. Then Job continued his discourse and said, As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who's embittered my soul, for as long as life is in me, and the breath of God is in my nostrils, my lips certainly will not speak unjustly, nor will my tongue mutter deceit. Far be it from me that I should declare you right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness. I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days. May my enemy be as the wicked, and my opponent as the unjust. For what is the hope of the godless when he's cut off, when God requires his life? Will God hear his cry? Will the distress come upon him? Or when the distress comes upon him? Will he take delight in the Almighty? Will he call on God at all times? I will instruct you in the power of God. What is with the Almighty I will not conceal. Behold, all of you have seen it. Why then do you act foolishly? This is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the inheritance which tyrants receive from the Almighty. Though his sons are many, they are destined for the sword. His descendants will not be satisfied with bread. His survivors will be buried because of the plague. Their widows will not be able to weep. Though he piles up silver like dust, prepares garments as plentiful as the clay, he may prepare it, but the just will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. He has built his house like the spider's web, or as a hut which the watchman has made. He lies down rich, but never again. He opens his eyes, it's no longer. Terrors overtake him like a flood. A tempest steals him away in the night. The east wind carries him away, and he's gone, for it whirls him away from his place. It'll hurl at him without sparing. He will surely try to flee from its power. Men will clap their hands at him and will hiss him from his place. So, what declaration does Job make about his personal faith in God? Because I think this is one of the most powerful statements of faith in the book, right? But what does he say about what he believes? Eric, and then did you have a hand up? Okay, Eric, go ahead.
So he believes in God. He's not going to speak unjust against him. And he said that I will go to my grave believing I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not going to I'm not going to tell you you're right, because you're not.
Yeah. Even believing that God has caused all this, I'm not giving up on my God, right? I'm not giving up on my integrity. I'm not changing my story. I'm sticking to it, right? Rick?
Yeah, as the integrity part, he says, I'm not going to lie to you because God cares about that. And kind of it's his way of saying, all these things you've been accusing me of, like I don't care what God thinks. No, I do. In fact, I care so much that the easier thing would be to just, oh yeah, you're all right, and get off my back. But he says, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give in because that would be untruthful, and God cares about whether I'm truthful. And so I think he's just, again, showing, like you said, his integrity, that it matters to him that his reputation, in as much as he can control it, that he's, I know it'd be easier just to give in, have you guys get off my back, but that would be lying, and I'm not a liar.
Yeah. It's almost like through torture, somebody gets a false confession out of somebody, right? If we nag him enough and pressure him enough, we'll get him to admit he's guilty. He's like, I can't change my story. This is the truth. And I trust God, even though I feel like he's against me and I don't understand it, I still trust him. And it's going to be bad for people who are on the other side of God. And I care more about what happens then than I do what's happening right now. So without New Testament revelation, he has an understanding of the eternal. And I don't know how much or exactly what he understands, but imagine with so little, he believes so much about God. And I just love this, he believes in the resurrection. There's people today that don't believe in the resurrection. There's people in Jesus' day who saw resurrection who didn't believe in the resurrection. And this man believes it. So, and he goes on to warn them, right? You guys need to shape up. You've got to behave properly because we're all in this together. This is the second or third time he's told them, there will come a day where you'll be held accountable for your actions right now and making up all this stuff about me. And you don't want to be on the other side in judgment. We've got a comment up here from Joanne.
I think it's such a beautiful speech. He should said it to each one of them every time they spoke.
Yeah, I wish he would have stuck with this one instead of some of the ones where he stooped to their level. I agree, right? Good. Yeah, some of these verses are worth like cross-stitching on something, right? You know, just like that, I know that my Redeemer lives, right? This is the one right here, the same kind of thing. Good. Other thoughts on this speech here? Jacqueline?
I do enjoy that throughout all of the accusations and all of that, Job stays above reproach when it comes to his character and all of that. And just that, I mean, at that point, I think I would have been like, you know, everything's kind of gone. Why am I caring about, you know, keeping my character intact? But
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason why James says, consider Job, right? The patience of Job. So it's interesting, though, at the end of this, he sounds like his friends, doesn't he? Because they actually agree on something here. I don't think he disagrees with their worldview. That God deals with sinners, and sinners don't have a legacy, and he will wipe them out. Their treasure that they stored up, they'll never get to enjoy it. I think ultimately, now maybe his time scale is different, a little bit more eternal than they thought, but his view of God is also a God of justice who deals with things even on the earth. However, he still maintains, I'm innocent, right? But, you know, if you read the end of this, you would have thought it was one of his friends' arguments against him, right? Because it does sound kind of like it. So that's just basically what makes it even more amazing that Job isn't bad-mouthing God. Because even though he believes God is just, and he believes something's going on right now that isn't just, he's still sticking with God. Because he knows there's something bigger than him that he doesn't understand. The God that, according to the last chapter, the God who can differentiate light and dark and made that happen. The God who rules over death and life. This God is worth worshiping and honoring and staying true to. And he even tells them, you guys know the power of God, and you've been acting foolishly. There are things that you know to be true that you're not admitting to, just from simple observation. And he said, probably they've had conversations in the past where they all got along and agreed on things. He's saying, you know better. I know you guys. You know, but now you're all acting foolishly in this. So, and I can't disagree with the point. Does it pay to be wicked? No. It's not. But does it always pay right now to be a Christian? The truth is, sometimes it might be harder right now to be a Christian. Your life may temporarily get more miserable if you're a Christian. If you follow God and believe him and trust him and do things his way, you might be asking for hurt. However, we all understand that God will eventually deal with the problem of sin. So, once again, he was asking for Jesus and wanted to know the plan, even though he didn't know who Jesus was, right? Got a comment up here from Connie. But yeah, I just think about that over and over again. You know, I don't know when Job would have found out about who Jesus is and what he did, but I mean, it would have been a relief, right, to hear about that.
Well, first, you just said something made me think that I've heard so many times people say, how can you believe there's a God and everything? And the best retort you could give to that, well, how it's better to believe that and know where you're going than not to believe it. At what you have to, of course, it all has to come to the heart, through the heart. But in the beginning, question this. Don't just give up right away. But then I was thinking about these friends of his, and I was trying to figure it out. how the saying goes, it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and to remove all doubt. It's better to keep your mouth shut and appear stupid than open it and remove all doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly there were plenty of times that they would have been better off not speaking. Oh, Harvey's got a comment too.
I think Job knew that they was sin in everybody's life, on a regular basis. I think here he's trying to figure out what he did. He's not blaming God per se. He's trying to figure out what he did so he could repent of it. Because, like I said, he knew they sinned because his kids, he made sacrifices for them every time. But his friends, I believe I'd have had these guys going after the first round because they were constantly doing nothing but belittling him. He's got all these problems, and then you get no consolation from them. That got to hurt even worse.
Yeah. That's not what you want in a friend, is it? Someone like that. Go ahead, Rick.
We realize that the things that his friends are doing, at least some of the things, are actually sinful according to what Jesus teaches us about, giving people the benefit of the doubt, things like that. There's real sin that these guys are committing. And Job, as far as their accusations, has not. And it is so, the righteous sufferer, which again, we're familiar with that concept in the New Testament. The righteous sufferer is not only laden with the problem of having to suffer at all, but he has to suffer for someone else's wrong and evil, and then in their eyes, they look upon him as guilty and worthless. And we just recognize that Job is a real champ, because even though he says some harsh things back to his friends, he doesn't engage in the same sinfulness that they do, and ultimately God calls on him to offer sacrifices for them. And I think that it's really hard when we know we haven't done something wrong and someone else has, and yet to bear with their accusations, to just let them kind of tear into you and to say, well, I know I could bring all these accusations against you, but that's not going to be helpful right now. Right now, you just got to take your lumps. And although I don't think Job isn't trying to keep that from happening, but it's just so impressive what he's able to do, that they are wrong. They are sinning. Job knows that they're sinning, and he knows that he's not guilty. And instead of just calling down, Lord, just strike them all dead right now, as I think many of us might be tempted to, he's got a different attitude. It's rough, but it's impressive.
Yeah. I want to end with 2 points. That one kind of leads me into my first one. It's hard to be falsely accused, isn't it? I have been a couple of times falsely accused, but I saw my dad more often, and it's hard to watch from the outside and to see someone bear up under that. And the natural inclination is to get even, to whoop them. And here he is even trying to prove his innocence. But, it's something that Jesus understood deeply. Job understands. A lot of the prophets understood. But sometimes we're going to be falsely and wrongly accused, and people aren't going to understand. Stick with your faith. Stick with what you know to be true. And the other point I want to make is, if you're kind of like me too, I like to have all the answers. I like to have understanding, and there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like I've dug in deep to a lot of things that are really hard questions, and I keep doing that if it's something that confuses me or puzzles me, something new I've heard. That it's good to have questions, but I want you to understand that faith isn't about having every single answer. Now, it's not a blind faith. I'm not telling you to take a leap of faith. I'm not telling you to accept it without question. In fact, that's the opposite. Faith is based upon reasonable evidence. However, we also need to be comfortable with the idea that sometimes in life we may have questions that don't have answers. That doesn't mean we should throw out all the things that we have come to know as true while we're trying to sort out our faith journey. Be patient and let God's word do its work. In fact, some people run away from God's people. They stop going to church. They stop reading their Bible and praying when times get hard. And those are the various places you're supposed to get answers. And instead of going where you should to get answers, they run away from it and they turn to every other thing. Or they distract themselves with drugs and alcohol or whatever. people try to run away instead of buckle down and think through it. And we're called upon to do that hard work and think through difficult questions. So we're going to continue with chapter 28, which is the hymn to wisdom, next week. It's a powerful chapter. We'll do that on Sunday night. Thanks, everybody.
Our first song tonight will be 531, Faith of Our Fathers. Let's all sing. Faith of our fathers, living still, in spite of dungeon, fire, and sword, know how our hearts beat high with love whenever we hear that glorious word. Faith of
Please join me tonight in Psalm 139 for a couple minutes. Just wanted to share some scripture that I've been enjoying recently, and this is a Psalm of David that I think is particularly beautiful, and so I just wanted to read through it with you all this evening. Psalm 139. Please follow along if you can. To the choir master, a psalm of David. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness will cover me, and the light about me be night. Even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies make your name in vain, take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O Lord, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. Just a couple quick notes kind of on this chapter. This is just kind of a complete meditation on the omniscience and the omnipresence of God, how he knows all. He knows all because he is everywhere. First of all, I love the way that David, he brings personal relevance to everything that he talks about here. He doesn't just say, Lord, you know the thoughts of every man, you know the ways of every man, you know the days of every man. He says, Lord, you have searched me. Lord, you have known my heart. When I sit down and when I rise up, you know me, or you know it. You understand my thoughts. You understand my words before I say them. Kind of in essence, I know myself, but you know me more than I know myself. And those moments where you're like, I can't think of what to say, I don't know how to feel about this issue that I'm dealing with, the Lord knows all those things. He understands all. And David gets to the point where in verse 17 he cries out, I wish I could understand your thoughts the way that you understand my thoughts. And it's something good, I think, for us to keep in mind as we go day to day. Lord, you know my thoughts. There's nothing I can do to hide from you. I can hide nothing for you because you know my thoughts. I think this chapter, or this psalm, is really kind of a great example of what Solomon writes, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. He sees all of these attributes of God, and he starts to understand how mighty God is, and he makes the statement, the knowledge is too wonderful for me. I can't even begin to describe it. So just powerful words from David. And he gets to the point at the end where instead of just saying, Lord, you know me anyway, he says, Lord, I'm glad that you can search and know my heart. Because the Lord is the witness of David's uprightness. And that's the same way for all of us, that the Lord should be the witness of our uprightness. He is the one who sees our hearts and can judge them well. that's kind of all I have tonight. But in closing, I would like to read another summary of this chapter. There's a famous quote attributed to Socrates that he says, "The more I learn, the more I realize that I know nothing." And that's kind of where David is in this chapter, or in this psalm, I think. Matt Bastard, who was a hymn writer, and he did a lot of work with writing down the psalms and setting them to lyrics. And he has a kind of a summary of this chapter that I'd like, or of this psalm, I keep saying chapter, of this psalm that I'd like to read. And if you'd like, follow along. Again, it's shorter than the actual psalm, but you'll get to see kind of, he pulls the best elements, I think, of this psalm and kind of ties them all in a pretty knot. And so I'd like to close with this, starting again at the beginning of the psalm. O Lord, you search and know my every way. You know when I rise up and when I fall. You understand my thoughts from far away. Before I speak a word, you know it all. You hem me in behind me and before. You lay your hand upon me lovingly. I know myself, and yet you know me more. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. If I ascend to heaven, you are there, or make my bed in Sheol, you are there. Where could I go beyond your Spirit's care? Where could I flee? For you are everywhere. If I should rise upon the wings of dawn, or dwell in distant reaches of the sea, no matter where I go, you still lead on. Your hand will always be there holding me. You wrote down all the days ordained for me, before a single one had been displayed. I give you thanks you brought my life to be so fearfully and wonderfully made. O Lord, you know my thoughts, my soul you see. Now search me, try me, know my heart, I pray. Reveal each sinful way you find in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. I think it's good to meditate on scripture that we find particularly insightful and beautiful. And so tonight, if this doesn't really lend itself to an invitation, but if you would like to sanctify Christ as your Savior this evening, we have an invitation song picked out, and please come to the front as we sing.
Have thine affections been nailed to the cross? Is thy heart right with God? Dost thou count all things for Jesus but loss? Is thy heart right with God? Is thy heart right with God? Washed in the crimson blood, cleansed and made holy, humble and lowly, right in the sight of God. Hast thou dominion o'er self and o'er sin? Is thy heart right with God? Over all evil without and within, is thy heart right with God? Is thy heart right with God? Washed in the crimson blood, cleansed and made holy, humble and lowly, right in the sight of God. Nor all thy powers under Jesus' control, is thy